Great, so thank you very much for joining us back for the kind of roundtable portion of the day. This is going to be kind of slightly similar in theme, and I'm sure a lot of the same issues are going to come up from this morning. We're going to be talking through people's journeys in academia, but more from a kind of ECR standpoint. So we've got 3 ECR speakers that I will introduce now. So I'll kind of go along, and then I'm sure we'll find out more about you as the kind of discussion progresses. But we've got Dr. Amanda Blake-Davis, who is a postdoctoral research fellow in English literature at the University of Derby, and honorary research fellow in the School of English at the University of Sheffield, where she was awarded her PhD in 2020. She's currently preparing her first monograph, Shelley and Androgyny. Her postdoctoral project at the University of Derby explores drawings of trees and other botanical figures in Percy Bysshe Shelley's manuscripts through what she terms the poet's intermediary ecology. Since 2019, Amanda has served on the executive of the British Association for Romantic Studies as a postgraduate representative, after having served as Communications Fellow for the Keats Shelley Association of America from 2018 to 2019. She's published articles in the Keats Shelley Review, English Journal of the English Association, and Romanticism on the Net, and her article, Ephemeral Are Gay Gulps of Laughter, P.B. Shelley, Louis MacNeice, and the Ambivalence of Laughter won the 2020 English Association Essay Prize. And then we've got Dr. Hannah Moss, who completed her PhD studies at the University of Sheffield in January 2021, supervised by Professors Jo Bray and Angela Wright. Her thesis focused on the characterisation of artist heroines in British women's writing from 1760 to 1830. She's currently co-editing the Edinburgh Companion to Jane Austen and the Arts and Works for the National Trust. And then finally, we've got newly Dr. Mary Going, who is a research associate at the University of Sheffield, working with Dr. Maisha Wester on a project exploring the ways that Gothic fiction influences discussion of race. And she's currently in the final stages of her PhD, as of when this bio was written, exploring literary constructions of Jewishness. She's the web officer for the International Gothic Association and co-lead of the Gothic Bible project, and is author of The Wandering Jew, Protestant Negotiations in the Gothic Mode, forthcoming from Cambridge University Press in 2022. Her previous publications include The Blood is the Life, an exploration of the vampire's Jewish shadow in Horror and Religion by University of Wales Press, and Sexual Violence and Jewish Persecution in Walter Scott's Ivanhoe in the journal Bible and Critical Theory. She's also been a regular co-host of the online shows Sundays with Dracula, Sundays with Frankenstein, and Sundays with Jane Eyre for the Rosenbach Museum in Philadelphia. So thank you very much to all 3 of you for joining us. I think we'll probably start, if it's okay, thinking about the kind of, that's quite a relatively recent and very recent concern for all of you. So I think a question that kind of comes up when we're talking to MA students in particular is, how did you decide on your PhD projects, and what was it about the Gothic that really made you think, I want to study this for an extended period of time? So everyone wants to start.
Do you want to start?
I will start first. I guess it's the most fresh in my mind. So if anyone has any questions specifically about Bivers, I guess do ask them, and I will just tell you about what happened yesterday. But what I think Lauren and Dale have both said is, first and foremost, start with something that you're passionate about and that you're interested in, because the PhD journey and the research journey afterwards will be hard, and there will be lots of kind of moments of despair. So what you need is something that you are interested in and that you're passionate about, that can kind of carry you through. In terms of my kind of research, I am really interested in the intersection of religion and literature, and one of my other passions is Gothic and horror. So I was like, well, this is what I want to do, this is what I'm interested in, and that worked out for me. But I think definitely at the start, just think about, especially if you are kind of in that kind of early stages of thinking about a PhD project, one of the most important things is this something that I can sustain for 3, 4, 5, or in my case, 7 years, because I did it part-time. Because you will need that kind of enthusiasm and interest to carry you through both the kind of the good times, but also the dark times. I'll let you guys speak as well.
Yeah, I'll reiterate what Mo said. You've really got to love your topic, because quite often funded, ready-formed projects will come available, and they're quite nice in that they've already got a pot of money attached to them, and maybe there might not be too much competition to get one of those, depending on how popular or niche the subject is. But if you've not sort of designed it yourself, you kind of losing out on some of that autonomy, which is really, really great. And what kind of infused me about doing a PhD is that I've got that time. It's a real luxury to study exactly what it is you're interested in. I remember finishing an undergrad study and just feeling like, what, that's it? There's still loads more to learn. And that's what propelled me on. And during the MA, I did the Rise of the Gothic module with Angela, and I found that really inspiring. And we kept reading all these novels, they all seemed to have lots of women artists in them. I thought, well, nobody's talking about this. It was always sort of the 19th century artists, sort of the rise in opportunities for women to study, that all the research available was concentrating on, and people weren't really studying 18th century women's art in the novel. So that's what kind of fired my imagination and got me started on my project. And I think now I still love it. It's not got to that point where you think, oh, after all these years and all the stress and tears and editing, oh, goodbye to that now. I think, and that's what prepares you ready for ECR life, is that if you've still got that love and want to find out more about it. And I've spoken to other people who come to the end of their PhD and feel like they can nicely package that away in a box and move on and think, right, that's nice, that's done. But I think I'm still at that stage where I do want to know more, and there's more to find out all the time.
Yeah, well, as Helen's just said, I mean, curiosity is so key. You have to have this internal personal curiosity that keeps driving you throughout the MA study, throughout the PhD. One thing I'd like to say to MA students in particular is don't think about going to the PhD as a straightforward trajectory. You don't need to finish your MA and go straight to PhD. That was certainly not my experience. So I'm kind of an interloper here. I'm not a Gothicist, I'm a Romanticist actually. But I did my master's on modern and contemporary Irish poetry, so even a further remove. I did that at Queen's University, Belfast. And after I finished my master's, I felt slightly disillusioned with academia. I wasn't quite sure if that's the path that I wanted to go down. So I took a break and I went and became qualified in English language teaching, and actually went and lived in South Korea for 3 years, teaching English language to mostly 4- and 3-year-olds. So a completely different path from teaching undergraduate students. And it was during that interim when I was teaching English language abroad that I realized I missed that curiosity. I missed the challenge of academia, and I wanted to come back. And that's when I wrote my PhD proposal and ended up here at Sheffield.
Great, yeah. I think it's really interesting how, like, even across the last panel and here, we've just got so many different kind of journeys into academia. What other kind of considerations were you thinking about when you were applying for the PhD? Because I think the topic is obviously hugely important, but like, is there anything else that you would advise kind of potential PhD candidates to think about before they apply?
I think you have a lot of freedom in choosing your supervisor, choosing someone who would complement your own research interests and background. So as I said, I did my master's in modern and contemporary Irish literature, and I found a romanticist, a Shelleyan here at Sheffield, Madeline Callaghan, who has a similar background working in Irish poetry, and that really spoke to me. We have this connection, we have these shared interests. So I thought she'd be a great person to approach and work with, and she was.
Yeah, I think often finding the supervisor is perhaps more of a linchpin than the institution itself. It's not a case of sort of undergraduates who are given the UCAS tables and lead tables and things that you go on and look at the nightlife and all things like that that influence your decision. I think one of the top things is having the right supervisor to work with you, and not just in terms of specialism. Yes, they've got to have that sort of relevant specialism from them to be able to guide you, but to have that that relationship as well, where it's supportive and constructive, and that you can perhaps even go on to collaborate after. We talked a lot about academic collaborations. I'm doing work now with both my supervisors that just put me in good stead, I think.
Absolutely, I'll just completely agree with everything that Amanda and Hannah have said about the importance of supervisors. So I initially came to Sheffield in my undergrad because they offered a Gothic module, and I took that Gothic module in second year, and it was Angela's module, and I basically haven't looked back since. I worked with her on my undergraduate dissertation on the Gothic and anti-Catholicism, and again for my MA dissertation, I worked with Angela again on a similar topic, anti-Catholicism again, but in other kind of more understudied texts. And I knew that starting the kind of PhD journey, I've worked really well with Angela before, and she's really incredibly supportive. So I wanted to stay in Sheffield and stay with the Gothic, but also partly stay with Angela. So that was a big part in my kind of PhD journey and choosing where to study and also who to study with. So I would say whether it's somebody that you know or somebody that you're thinking about working with, research them or kind of establish a relationship or think about who you have already in your kind of undergraduate or MA kind of career, who you have really enjoyed working with, and think about that as well. So yeah, I think that is one of the most important things as well. You need, again, the curiosity, and you need a passionate project, but you also need somebody who you know will support you academically and also pastorally. So yeah, thanks, Angela.
Lots of academic
I think it comes back to what Jane was saying earlier about just not being afraid to ask as well, because I know I'd known Jo for years before coming to the point of applying for PhD, and I sort of found it nerve-wracking saying, will you supervise me, please? And thankfully he said yes. But if somebody was too busy or didn't feel like they were the right fit, they might just put you on the right path with somebody else and say, oh, I don't think I'd be great for this, but I have a friend at this institution or another institution that I can put you in touch with, and put those networks into play. So yeah, don't be afraid to reach out.
Yeah, definitely. I suppose the next, I have envisaged kind of moving through the PhD kind of temporally now, so maybe kind of thinking about from the beginning, what other things that came up in your PhD, kind of experiences of public engagement or other kinds of collaboration, did you find really kind of rewarding about being a doctoral student?
I'll start because I feel like you've heard half of my story already from Lauren. Obviously, Lauren and myself are doing PhDs part-time. There is no right way to do a PhD, whether it's going straight through or taking a break, and also whether you do it full-time or part-time, and whether you take breaks in between. But definitely doing it part-time, I think I found it incredibly valuable to have other kinds of projects along the way to sustain me. And luckily for me, I guess I hit the kind of academic twin jackpot with Lauren. And it's, collaborating with Lauren in conferences, what we've done online. The original Sheffield Gothic website was on Blogger. And I don't know if anyone remembers or has used Blogger. It is not a very user-friendly site. So we kind of, at one stage, want to make this more accessible online. So we made the WordPress, and hopefully that is better than the Blogger site. But yeah, just thinking about what you want to do, and just doing it, asking or finding those opportunities. Lauren is a lot better front of house. I really like doing all of the back of house stuff. So I'd often be at conferences hiding in the background on my tweet deck with all of my different Twitter accounts, trying to do all the behind the scenes stuff, sorting out kind of the schedule and the kind of design things and all of those kinds of back of house stuff. And that worked really well with mine and Lauren's relationship, and also just in terms of like bouncing ideas off of each other and being able to, be like, do you want to grab a coffee while we go and talk about this project? But then also we'll talk about our research, and then also maybe think about another project that we're going to be doing down the line. So it's just that kind of, I guess it doesn't always happen, but there will always be people there who want to work with you or who will be open to working with you. And I would definitely say if you're at an institution where there aren't a lot of maybe active PhDs or postgrads, or necessarily like people who are working specifically in the Gothic, then don't feel afraid to reach out to groups. So like Sheffield Gothic, I also know there's a lot of really great postgrads at MMU, or other kinds of institutions, and just be like, do you want to collaborate and maybe do a joint session or a joint event? And I think going online has meant that we've been able to do so much stuff as well, and it's really broadened out what we've been able to do. And one of the best things that I've done with Lauren recently is the kind of Sundays with series with the Rosenbach Museum in Philadelphia, where we've just finished our third book. We started at the kind of beginning of the pandemic with Dracula, where we would read on the show we talk about a chapter of Dracula a week, and we were together, one of 4 co-hosts, so we count as one. So every other week there was an actor, a writer, a horror enthusiast, and then it was me and Lauren talking about Dracula, and then we got invited back to do the same with Frankenstein, and so again that kind of online discussion show talking about a chapter of the book a week. And then again recently with Jane Eyre, where we also had Hannah involved as well. So doing these things is also a great way to be like, here are my friends that are also really good at doing things, and they have amazing work that they're doing, and can they join so that they can also share their work and their profile. So collaboration is a way to sustain yourself throughout the PhD, and whatever projects that means for you. I understand not everyone is comfortable on screen or front of house or necessarily online. There are other things that you can do in terms of blog posts or whatever. Just find what works for you. It will help to promote you. It will also help to sustain you throughout the PhD. But it's also a way to be like this. These are my friends or my colleagues, and their work's amazing. And I get a lot out of being able to showcase and promote and show off the amazing stuff that my friends are doing as well. So yeah, definitely, I think that that was really helpful to me throughout the PhD.
Yeah, and obviously you can tell I've really benefited from making friends with Lauren and Mary being put forward for opportunities. So yeah, no, it's brilliant. And the product of their success as well, which is lovely. So I first met these two when I came back to Sheffield to do my MA, because I had a break in between my undergrad, and I knew I wanted to sort of get involved, and Angela had mentioned there was a reading group and we could put our contact details down. So I went along to the first one and remember saying, going to introduce myself, saying, can I be your friend? And they took me under their wing, and I got involved with reimagining the Gothic. And I think public speaking was the side that I'd always been nervous about and not wanting to do. I wanted to do academia for going to archives and libraries and doing the research and being terrified of actually having to do PowerPoint presentations and things. And I think it was when it came around to the second reimagining, Kathleen said, oh, and you could do a paper. And I just went, oh, okay. It's the first time I chickened out. I was like, I'll do a children's activity for the public engagement afternoon, and didn't do a research presentation. So yeah, the second time around, it was kind of a gentle push in the right direction. And I remember ringing my mum up after I'd spoken to say, it was fine. I don't know why I was so scared of doing it. And I think it was such a lovely environment that had been created, and what everyone always comments about reimagining actually is what a supportive environment it was. It ended up being the space where a lot of PhD students made their first conference presentations, and it was kind of quite a nice, relaxed, supportive environment that sort of fostered that community. And it inspired me to go and organise my own conference. We were looking at Sheffield that we've got lots of Gothic scholars all together, but my project is a mixture of literary history and art history, and we don't have an art history department. I thought, well, if I organise a conference that's about women's writing on the arts, it's a great way of bringing external speakers in, and I can meet people. And so that was in the International Women's Day, actually, of 2019. I held a conference here, and my keynote speaker was Claudine van Hensbergen, who was lecturer at Northumbria. And she's brilliant, did a brilliant keynote for me, and we kept in touch, and she got in touch with me about doing an edited collection of papers linked to it's a sort of link between the theme of my conference and one she had later organised. So it's the perfect way to bring our projects together. So that's another way of making collaborations, is keeping in touch with your conference speakers, and you'll have those shared interests to bring you all together and move forward.
Yeah, I'd say like the internet is very much your tool as a first-year PhD student as you're getting started out. I didn't have Twitter at all before I started my PhD. It was during my PhD induction that Jonathan Ellis, who was the PGR director in my cohort, was saying how he'd found Twitter so useful for an academic community and fostering academic communities. So I went ahead and set one up, And I just quite quickly found scholars working in Romantic Studies and found the British Association for Romantic Studies. And they had a blog on their website where PhD students and other academics could contribute blog posts. And so I reached out to them. I mean, Dale said, just get in touch with people. I reached out to them, proposed a blog post on, they've got an On This Day series, so for bicentenaries coming up, proposed a post on Percy Shelley's translation of Plato's Symposium, which kind of obsessed with and informs my thesis. And they said, great, write it and we'll look at it and we'll post it. And they did, and that's evolved into another series of blog posts I've done for them. And then eventually they put out a call for a postgraduate representative in 2019. I applied for that, wrote in my application that I'd already had these blog post connections, collaborations with them, and was successful in that post. So as soon as you start your PhD, start setting up these networks, start finding out places you can contribute, blogs you can contribute to. Maybe you could do a social media takeover for a certain association. Make yourself known through the internet. And that goes for your institution as well. So I think it was in my first or second year, there was a screen printing workshop here at Sheffield open to PhD students. And I went and attended that and proposed to write up a blog post about that experience for the School of English blog. So just, yeah, blogs are really great ways to get your voice out there and to build up these networks, especially in your first year as a PhD student.
And it sounds like a lot of the opportunities you all have kind of rolled on from one thing to another. I'm always interested, and you always hear from PhD students that there's so much you can do. How do you choose which opportunities are going to benefit you? Is there something that you look for if you get offered something that you are, more immediately drawn to? How do you kind of balance doing all the various things that you can do as a doctoral student? A big question.
I think it has a little bit to do with what are you interested in, which is obviously the PhD. You need to choose something that you're passionate in, and it's the same with what kind of other projects do you get involved with. Like, what are you interested in? Because not everybody wants to go on the radio, and not everybody wants to necessarily write blogs. So it's kind of finding something that you want to do. But I'd also think about it as well. Obviously make sure that you enjoy it, but think about, I guess, post PhD, which sounds weird to say, like in the first year of your PhD, but think about, not everyone unfortunately is going to stay in academia. So what else could you be doing that could potentially benefit you? So I did a lot of online stuff like websites, building websites, maintaining websites, running social media platforms, and creating blog posts and blog series and that kind of thing. Which, is one avenue that you can take. You can also look into like teaching workshops if you're thinking about those kinds of things post academia, or also public engagement things. There's lots of kinds of other academic adjacent jobs and job markets that you could think about, making yourself kind of look good in that kind of job market, but also balancing that with what do I enjoy and what will I enjoy doing. So it's not privileging one over the other, and I definitely say, if you are, make sure you do something that you enjoy, because I've definitely got a lot out of Sheffield Gothic and the kind of welcoming space that it's kind of created, and the collaboration that's led to, and just having somebody that you can talk to and say, do you want to get a coffee because I think I need it this week, or I know that you're not supposed to have all this cheese, but do you want to go and get some cheese and an ice cream with me? It's that kind of finding things that you can do that you'll enjoy, but also, I guess, with an eye to thinking about post PhD as well.
Yeah, it's a really good question because it's so difficult because there's so many different things you could be putting your time and energy into, and at the end of the day you've got 100,000 word thesis to write that you don't want to sort of be using other events opportunities as a kind of elaborate form of procrastination that you're avoiding doing your sort of daily writing. So what I'll say about that is use the academic calendar to your advantage. You've got sort of that cycle inbuilt to sort of know when the big conferences always come up. So we would have an 18th century one in January each year, so you could sort of plan around your schedule. You'd know if you were teaching certain modules. There was one semester where I taught 2 modules, and it was quite a heavy load when I'd been used to just taking on one. So I knew that, oh, I'm not going to have as much time for writing this semester. This is taking the priority. The next semester I'll make sure that the balance tips back again. So just sort of keep that cycle in mind of where the sort of busy periods are. When I organised my conference, it kind of ran itself up until the month beforehand. It was really easygoing, sort of when I just sent out a CFP and set up a Twitter account, and it kept ticking along, waiting for abstracts to come in. And then the month before, it was like all hell broke loose. I need to contact finance and make sure I've got the food and everything in order, and ticket sales and all the craziness that goes on with the conference organisation, when it can look like an elegant swan when really you're kicking away madly trying to stay afloat. It's usually one of those situations. So yeah, the month beforehand, you know you're going to be really busy, and then once it's over, you've got that lull again, and you can be moving onto other things. So yeah, say use that yearly cycle in your favour to plan where and when you can commit to extra things.
I'd say also don't be afraid to say no to opportunities that come up. As a PhD student, certainly I felt kind of pressured to say yes to everything that everyone asked me to do, but don't be afraid to say no. For instance, the first conference I presented at was an English graduate conference at the University of Oxford, which was really supportive because it was just a community of postgraduate students giving papers. And they had a postgraduate student journal, and they asked if I would submit my paper as an article to this journal. And I was really flattered and immediately wanted to say, yes, of course I will, my first publication, yes. But I went and spoke to my supervisor about it, and she thought this paper could turn into a bigger article further on down the line. Let's hold off now, wait and develop it further. So I had to turn down that invitation, which felt a bit strange as a first-year PhD student being asked to submit for a publication. But saying no ultimately worked out in the long run because I was able to develop that paper into something bigger and submit it to another journal further on down the line.
I suppose it all comes back to what we were talking about in the first panel about what do you want to do versus what you feel you should do.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Thank you. I suppose the next big question, I suppose, after you've had the whole PhD and you've done all these opportunities, the thesis submission is the huge thing that's obviously on the forefront of your mind. So I'd be interested to know what advice you might give students who are nearing completion, just in terms of those last kind of busy few months of writing. Would like to start?
You're both looking at me.
No, we've got a question about Bible next.
Okay, so first of all, from the first like year of your PhD, make sure you keep a note of all of your references. So yes, Lauren is looking at me because you will get to the final stage and you might be like, oh, this quote's really great, but actually, where did I get it from? Or you might be at the kind of stage where you're trying to finish a draft and you realize that you haven't done any of your footnotes, and then you also have to do your bibliography. So keep a note of all of your references and especially where you've got them from. I always just used to kind of start a Word document and I'd have the kind of bibliographic kind of detail at the start, and then I'd have all of my quotes with a page number. I know there are other kinds of things that you can use that will do that for you, like Zotero. So if that works for you as well, it's just a way of kind of keeping them. There's no one right way to do them, and I think every academic either has a love-hate relationship with kind of referencing, because it's the kind of thing that you can do when you've got that kind of writing block. You're like, oh, I'm just gonna do my bibliography or do some footnotes, and technically this will work, but I'm not writing, so yay. But also it's a big thing, and if you get to the end of your project and your footnotes are half done or you're missing references, that's going to take a lot of time. When it comes to the actual submission, you'll need more time than you think you will. Be honest with yourself, be honest with your supervisors. If you're struggling, try and reach out and just say, I'm having a bad time, and there's always more time if you need it. But the main thing is just to not panic and to just get through it, I guess. But if you've done all of your research and your drafts, and you've got good supervisors who've supported you with chapter drafts and all of that kind of stuff, by the time you get to the end stage, it feels really overwhelming, but it is very much achievable. So that's the main thing to remember, is that you can do it, you will get over the hurdle, and it will be fine.
My final few months of writing and editing were interesting because lockdown hit. So if there was ever going to be a positive side to a pandemic, it was that it came at just the right time that I'd done my research and could basically hibernate and edit during lockdown. And I found it really beneficial to have that to keep me going through all that stress. I could get up in the morning, do kind of 9 till 5, pretending it was like a normal working day, doing your sort of daily edits, and forget what was going on in the wider world a little bit. So it's a bit of a different experience with the timing of mine. But like Mary says, leave yourself plenty of time. So these things always take longer than you expect. It's great if you've got some handy proofreaders on hand, because we're programmed to read what we think we've written and not what's actually on the page. So yeah, my parents came in useful for that. They were willing volunteers to proofread for me. So that's another bit of time to factor in. I didn't have to have my thesis printed out as a hard copy with another pandemic factor. It was just an online submission. But if things go back to that we've got to have print copies, that's another chunk of time to allow the print services to print and bind it. So I'd say to sort of look ahead at what the rules are. I had sort of a last minute panic that I'd written too much and would have to sort of cull loads of words, because I'd been hearing people from other institutions talking about their 80,000 word cut-off points and things, and I was like, oh no, mine's 100,000, and I found out Sheffield don't mind. You can basically write as much as you want, unless they've changed the rules. Don't quote me on that. They might have decided that after I submitted too much, you might have said no. But yeah, we're going to limit it now. But it's all those kind of last-minute panics like that. If you just go to the handbook and just familiarise yourself with it, it can save that kind of last-minute stress thinking, actually, have I done this right? Just look what referencing style is preferred, because I'd referenced as I went along, but still it took a long time because I hadn't stuck to one format. I'd just written all the details down, which you think, oh great, well done Hannah, you've kept up to date with the records, but they weren't all in one strict format, so it was still quite time consuming thinking, do you have a full stop after your page numbers or not, and what's in brackets and what isn't. So yeah, it all comes down to just leaving plenty of time and taking it calmly, one step at a time. If you say, I'm going to do a page of proofreading and go away and have a cup of tea and come back to it, just take it slow and steady wins the race, I suppose. But we don't always all have that luxury. Sometimes it is a bit more of a sprint finish. So just remember that, yeah, everyone's journey and deadlines are different. I know when I was in final stages of write-up, I was hearing about people in my cohort that were finishing and thinking, oh, I'm behind, but it's not a race, not a completely different timeline. Even though we start at the same time, people have different hurdles or projects that go on. So yeah, don't compare yourself to everyone else and think, oh, they've finished, I should have too. Just keep your eye on your own timeline that you'll set with your supervisors, and it'll all be fine.
Yeah, referencing is so important. I can't emphasize that enough. In the final months of finishing up my PhD, I actually ended up in the health center with a sprained wrist because I was trying to write my bibliography all in one go. So I hadn't been doing it along the way. So absolutely, anything you read, remember, you're not creating a works cited, you're creating a bibliography. Anything you read, anything you look at, put it in your bibliography right away. Don't leave that until the last minute. Like, look after your future self. Keep your future self in mind. And then Hannah mentioned the handbook, the code of practice. So for Sheffield students, do have a look through the code of practice. I think now you probably receive a digital version, but we received the actual paper code of practice handbook. It has everything in there about word limits, about the formatting, about your title page, what the thesis should actually look like. So do reference that in advance, and it won't cause you any issue as you approach this deadline.
I think I looked at a few friends' theses as well, because there is that issue of what what's it look like? What is your title page like? How long is it? And I think once I actually looked through some, it didn't seem quite as scary. It's like, yes, this is doable. It didn't necessarily have to be for the content. I wasn't necessarily reading it to compare how they'd approached a subject. It could have been something completely different, but just having it in your hands and thinking, oh, here's how they've done it, it just made it seem a lot less scary.
Yeah, I'm making mental notes. This is all very useful. I suppose the kind of next thing to think about after you've submitted the thesis is the viva. I think that's a term that a lot of people hear, but don't really what it means. So I suppose I'd just be interested to hear more about kind of what you were expecting from your vivas, how you found them, how you think you would advise people to prepare in future if they've got a viva coming up.
If you just
start again, shall I? Okay, so I think the most important thing is to, one, read your thesis a couple of times, and just be aware that nobody will know the work more than you. You are the one who has devoted however many years of your life to studying this topic, so you are the expert here. The other thing that I found really helpful was talking to people who had recently gone through the kind of viva process and asking them what they kind of found helpful and what they could suggest to me. So Lauren, I'm going to steal your advice that you gave to me a few weeks ago, which is, again, read your thesis, but also to kind of go through it and highlight your key arguments. That was one of the most important things I think you said to me. Highlight your arguments and just be prepared to, think about and maybe write some notes about how you would kind of expand or defend that argument, or what you're trying to say in that point. And if there are any bits as well that you think, oh, I think I haven't done as good a job as I wanted to here, or if there's a bit where maybe your thesis was over 100,000 words and you had to cut some stuff out, make a little note of that just to remind you, to remind yourself, I thought this was important, but I couldn't fit it in. And I think just doing that and it is quite helpful to think about, well, this is what I'm writing, and I do have an argument, and I am saying things, and I didn't talk about this, but I've made some kind of post-it notes. I wouldn't necessarily write reams and reams and reams of kind of written out, kind of typed up answers to questions, because you just won't know what you'll be asked. But as long as you've read your thesis and you know what you're saying, that's one of the most important things. The other thing that I would say is talk to your supervisors, because they also know your work and they also know you, and they can also help you in terms of the examination and telling you what to expect. So I had a chat with Angela a few days before, and that was really helpful to me in kind of telling me what to expect, and asking a few practice questions, and then also just reassuring me that it would be fine. So I think, yeah, one, read your work and just remember that you are the expert here. And two, talk to your friends and your colleagues and ask them what their experiences were like. And then three, talk to your supervisors and just kind of get their support and their advice as well.
Yeah, I would second all of that. I think before becoming a postgrad student, I think the viva or defence was something that was had this kind of mythic quality to it, as something terrifying, and maybe it's sort of the discourse that goes around it, of sort of having to defend what you've come up with, is this idea that you're going to be tripped up. But I'll say just wipe all those sort of fears away, and I think the further along I got into the process of writing and then preparing, it didn't seem as scary, because you become the expert in your own field of the particular area you're studying it. So it's just bringing the best out of you, and a chance to discuss what you've done with like-minded people and be enthusiastic about that. Mine was a really positive experience, and I think sometimes people say, oh, enjoy your viva. I'm not sure you can go quite that far, because there's always going to be some stress involved. That it is an examination, but it is the end point. You've done your thesis. This is just sort of the culmination where you get to discuss it with some experts in the field that are interested in what you've done. There's a workshop I did called Viva Survivor, and maybe the term survivor perpetuates that fear a little bit more, but it is, I would recommend it. It is really helpful. It is designed for PhD students from all disciplines, so it's not maybe really pinned down on English at all, but it's great for dispelling those fears about what's involved. And one of the really helpful bits about that workshop was that they circulated a list of sample questions, because there are some that you can guarantee that you'll get sort of you will get this kind of opening question designed to sort of settle your nerves a little bit, that is, why this subject, or how did you come to choose this subject? And it's very wide, very open, and it's designed to ease you in, and most examiners will sort of set the tone with something like that. And I was told that you get to make lots of notes, use post-it notes, and have a copy of your thesis to hand. I didn't actually end up referring to it during my Viva, but it might depend on what kind of questions you get. You might get an examiner that says, oh, turn to page 10, you've mentioned this, can you talk about that a bit more? It worked out that mine didn't go that way. They were more wide-reaching questions. But I think in the preparation, it's handy to just become really familiar with your sort of chapter layout. You might want to put some post-it notes sticking out at chapter boundaries so you can quickly flick to the relevant section if you want to refamiliarise yourself with something. But at the end of the day, you're going to be the expert in what you've written. You know what's in there. They're not going to be there to trip you up. Think of it as more of a discussion and a chance to elaborate. As Mary said, there might be things that you've not had a chance to include, and if your examiner is an expert in that particular field, they might be like, well, why have you not included this? And I think it's just a case of being prepared to justify that. It's with my thesis, I'd chosen not to include Francis Burney, and basically there was a thesis out there for somebody to write a thesis on Francis Burney and the arts, and I sort of wrestled with the idea of whether to include the Wanderer or not. I read it and reread it, and eventually didn't fit in. But that was something that came up in the discussion, and I could say, well, it was something I considered. It's not an omission. It's that I wanted to look at more sort of unknown works and perhaps use people that are the more famous 18th century writers as a springboard. So there are references to people like Austen and Burney as a starting point, but that's to then perhaps uncover some lesser known writers, and my focus was on them. So it's, yeah, just be prepared to defend those choices you've made for what you've included and what you've not. The date range is another one that you might be asked to comment on as well, but you can preempt a lot of where it's going to go. And remember, you've got some input in who you want to examine your thesis. I mean, it shouldn't be someone that you're really familiar with and have had a lot of contact with. But for myself, I was quite instrumental in pushing the direction I wanted to go, because I hadn't briefly met my examiner at a conference and thought she was really friendly and supportive, and it would be someone good to be in that environment with, and they were eminent in the field. And so I sort of said, well, could we approach this person? So you can put people forward to your supervisors. Don't feel that you have to follow a line of someone that's been suggested to you. So I've never met them, I've never heard them, I'm not sure it'll be a good fit. Feel free to have it. It's a discussion, as you choose.
Yeah, I attended that Viva Survivor course as well and found it really useful too. So for those of you who are University of Sheffield students, you can book onto that through the Think Ahead website. If you go into News and search Think Ahead, they've got a calendar where you can book onto Viva Survivor. I think it is available for students who are within 3 months of their Viva though. So if you're a first year, don't worry, you don't need to book onto it yet, just wait a bit. But within that course itself, some things that I took away from it that I found personally really useful in preparing for my Viva, I guess there were 3 main things that I found useful. So one was mock Vivas. So I did 2 mock Vivas, one with my supervisor and one with a fellow PhD student. They're both different experiences because the fellow PhD student wasn't familiar with my work in the way that my supervisor was. So it was great to get her input on it, and the questions that she gave me were entirely different from the questions my supervisor gave me. So perhaps do approach friends or approach other PhD students colleagues in the department ask if they would do a mock viva with you. Another thing is getting used to answering questions aloud. So for myself, I'm quite like quiet, introverted, soft-spoken person. I'm not used to speaking for hours at a time. But the viva is you'll be speaking for an hour, hour and a half, even more than that. So do get used to that. Walk around the house just answering questions to yourself, asking yourself questions. It's strange at first, but it's great preparation. And then third, I'm quite a visual person, so I found annotating my thesis in the ways Hannah said with Post-it notes was really useful for me. So color coding different chapters, color coding key points with Post-it notes. I found that really useful, and it made it easy to navigate my thesis during the viva.
Fantastic. Lots of kind of practical advice as well as just kind of preparing yourself sort of mentally. That is actually like 45 minutes of my questions. So I just wanted to make sure, if you'd like to ask any questions in the room or on the chat, then do feel free to ask them. Probably got another like 10-15 minutes. So if there's anything else that anyone here or online would like to ask about PhDs, postdocs, we haven't even touched on those yet, or any kind of aspect of ECR life, then do feel free to pop your hand up. Otherwise, I can carry on with my questions because I've got loads. Yeah, great.
Did anyone have a experience in early career research not using Twitter? Because I understand that for a lot of people it is very, very helpful. It just isn't for me personally. So I just wondered if anyone had that.
So
hopefully some good experiences without Twitter, not just like, I don't know, you realise you needed Twitter.
So repeat the question.
Oh, yeah.
Just for the so that was just a question about whether ECR life is possible without Twitter.
Yeah, so I live on Twitter and I have a tweet deck which I have many, many accounts, some of which you may know that I run, some of which you may not know that I run. So for example, I run the International Gothic Association Twitter purely because nobody else seems to want to run it. So that's me. But this is why I say, like, when you're choosing your projects or when you're choosing what to focus on, think about what you want to do and what you're interested in and also what you feel comfortable doing. Not everyone feels comfortable being on radio. Not everyone wants to be tied to Twitter. There are other social networks or social media kind of platforms that you can use. I think they are useful spaces. Twitter is not the be-all and end-all. There are lots of academics who are not on Twitter at all. Most of them are, I'd say, maybe on Facebook. And I think that it is still useful to have like Facebook groups where you can post, CFPs or events or just have a chat. I know when we've done the Sundays stuff with the Rosenbach, so Sundays with Dracula, Frankenstein and Jane Eyre, there's a big cohort of the audience who aren't on Twitter at all, and they just engage in the Facebook, but they really do enjoy kind of posting and having that kind of, I guess, more informal chat on Facebook. I don't use Facebook, but I do understand that it's really useful. There's other kinds of social media platforms that I don't personally use, but I know that Instagram and potentially TikTok are avenues that I think maybe, especially as we move out of the millennial academics and into the Gen Z academics, I'm sure that Gen Z will take over those spaces and make them useful. But you don't necessarily have to use Twitter to be an academic or even necessarily social media. You just need to think about what do you want to get out of this and how else, if you're not using Twitter, how else are you going to get your research out there or your public engagement out there? So it might be that you get in touch, that is that point that Dale said again, you ask about, approach a local radio station or a student radio station, or maybe see if you can do a blog post or something in person. There will be other avenues for you. I personally think that Twitter is a really important tool and a useful tool, but I also don't think it is the be-all and end-all, and there are spaces for everyone. So I don't know if that's necessarily told you where you should go or the kind of non-social media alternative to Twitter, but I think it's very much, you as an individual or maybe as a group finding a space, because it might just be that you set up something in a pub or it's a reading group or a horror group where you go and watch a film and then go and meet in a pub, and that can maybe lead into other things. like potentially public screenings at the showroom where you give a talk beforehand to introduce the film, and then you have a screening and maybe Q&A afterwards. There's lots of other things that, depending on what you research, you can find ways to fit yourself and your kind of where you're comfortable and what you want to do. So
No, it is useful.
Okay.
Useful hearing that.
Yeah, so social media aside, the writing projects I'm currently working on have all arisen from in-person meetings rather than online meetings. So whether that's through conferences or working with my supervisors or friends of friends down the line, they've all arisen that way rather than through online connections. The other thing I'd recommend is volunteering. So alongside my PhD studies, I was always interested in heritage industry, so I volunteered for the National Trust as a room guide. And then in October, they put a call out for anyone interested more in curatorial projects, as they're working a lot on their museum collection at the moment. So I got in touch with them and about my background in 18th century history and said I'd be interested in working with them, and they chose me along with 5 other volunteers to work on a project which was where we all selected an object we were interested in to research, and then we all had to link together in some way though, and which is where the wrangling started. But but we basically curated a sort of mini exhibition together, and so I'm really interested in anatomical models, and so I picked a medicine doll to research, and that sort of connects with where my sort of postdoc interests lie. So there's that nice connection there, even though it was something outside of a university context and more working with museums and heritage. And then after that, a few months later, they advertised for a paid position in the organisation. So that's why I'm now working for the National Trust. I've got that sort of foot in the door through initially volunteering to sort of work with them. And it was something that I'd always kept on through postgrad study. I know when I first came to Sheffield for the 18th century MA, they advertised the work placement module. So I was badgering Anne-Marie just before I even started saying, I want to go to Chatsworth, please send me to Chatsworth. So I really loved that opportunity. I've been to Chawton House as well in Hampshire, where Jane Austen's brother lived, and did a placement there. So yeah, think about organisations you can reach out to, like sort of beyond university institutions that you can partner up with and foster those links and see where they lead.
I'd say as well, like I found Twitter quite useful for learning about conferences and calls for papers and job opportunities. But if you want to bypass that, you can sometimes contact associations directly and ask to be added to their mailing list, and you'll get the same information that's on Twitter but in your email inbox. So for instance, the British Association for Romantic Studies BARS, you don't have to be a BARS member to sign up to their mailing list. Just send them an email, say you'd like to join it, and you don't have to pay anything, and you'll get all those updates that you would be finding on Twitter.
Are there any other questions from anyone in the room or online? I might ask another one then, and maybe if this is the last question, if that's all right. So I'm going to combine a few. So I know you're in kind of slightly different areas at the moment, postdoc and research associate, and I just wondered how you found your current position and how you think PhDs have prepared you for all the different kinds of work that you're doing. They're a good question to finish.
And if you want me to carry on what I was just saying about sort of how the National Trust position arose, when I applied for my job, I was really pleased to get it. And when I started, one of the first things my manager said to me, as well as the regional manager who came along as well, was, "You've got a PhD, this can't be your dream job, why do you want to be here?" Which was kind of a little bit of a surprise question when they'd given me the job and it was my first day. And I sort of explained that it had always been on my radar, that I'd been a volunteer, I'd been interested in the heritage industry. It wasn't sort of something out the blue that I'd suddenly changed path. It was sort of something I was always interested in. And sort of conversely, I sort of said to them, I was pleased to be given the job because I thought they might think someone with an English literature PhD might not necessarily be what they're looking for. So that we might want someone with heritage experience or a particular heritage MA. And I was really pleased to hear from them what they valued about PhD students and that experience they have. And it was really heartening that they sort of picked me above everyone else that had applied, because they valued that kind of wider experience. Sort of my niche area about women artists might not be that useful to them at the moment, but they knew I'd organised conferences, they knew I'd taught students, they really valued that I'd taught, because I'm working a lot with volunteers, and they saw teaching as a great way of showing that I could communicate to people on different levels, and that I valued inclusion and participation. So a lot of the values that we sort of encompass within the university were shared, and they really, really valued that. And that was something I was really pleased to find, because I did have that massive existential panic of, have I backed myself into a corner of researching something really niche that hasn't qualified me for something really specific outside of academia? And so I was pleased when they actually said, yeah, we do really value all these skills you've built up as you've worked towards your PhD. So yeah, I'll just pass that on and say, avoid having those panics that you are doing something worthwhile, whether you end up doing precisely what you want to or not, or whether it takes a winding path. Like I say, my position is 4 days a week, so I've still got a writing day, and doing events like this, it's nice to sort of stay connected, and I've not sort of closed that door. And I think at the moment I feel like I'm in quite an exciting position where there are opportunities. After a year after finishing where I thought, oh, I've had loads of no's and doors slammed in my face, what am I doing? It's holding on in there, and the right thing will come. If you've got a no, it just wasn't meant for you, and the right thing will be a yes. It just might take you a slightly different path than you had envisaged. But as Dale told us, we all have different paths into academia.
Do you want to talk video?
Yeah, I can go. So again, as you know, as Dale said earlier, sometimes you have to look for those miracles, and I feel like my job that I do now is one of those kinds of moments. My journey is not the typical PhD student journey, in that I'm already working with an amazing scholar, Dr. Maisha Wester, as her research associate, and I think it's just, I mean, I don't know. Maybe Maisha can tell you why she picked me, but I think part of it was just being in the right place at the right time and having the right skills. So one of the things that I've been really interested in throughout my PhD is the kind of online perspective, and also the public engagement aspect of being a PhD student, but also being an academic researcher. And I had those skills of being able to manage social media accounts, website development and website creation, but also public engagement and event kind of, organization. I've run the Reimagining the Gothic with Lauren and everyone else in Sheffield Gothic. I'd also run 2 of my own conferences under the Gothic Bible banner. So one just a kind of inaugural Gothic Bible conference, and then another one on Bucky in the Bible, because I need to get Bucky in here somewhere, so this is like a good time to bring her in. And what that meant was that when Maisha was looking for a research associate that had those skills, I had those skills, and it means that I get to work with Maisha on really cool events, and really looking at interesting ways to kind of broaden online engagement and academic engagement, and also just to kind of share Maisha's work, because I think she's great. But I think sometimes it will just be one of those kinds of miracles, you being in the right place at the right time with the right skills. Other times it will be kind of like you pushing and specifically going out and seeking and finding something and asking for something. So that's my kind of journey into academic work life, I guess. But everyone's career is different, and everyone's kind of PhD life and post-PhD life will be different. So just as like everyone's not running a race and you're not trying to get to the finish line before everyone else, it's the same beyond the PhD, is that you have your own journey, and you just need to do what's best for you. And if you have those moments, then just go for them. Seize the day, as Buffy would say.
So right after I finished my PhD, I worked as a postgraduate assistant here at Sheffield, working in the Center for Interdisciplinary Biblical Studies, actually helping with the conference there. And I picked up a number of other like fixed-term jobs around Sheffield during this interim between finishing my PhD and getting my first postdoc. So those included working in research services here at Sheffield, working in the library, just numerous little fixed-term jobs. I got my first postdoc at the University of Derby, which is where I am right now. And it's slightly similar to the PhD in that I'm working on my own research project. So I came on board with my own idea for a new research project I wanted to undertake, proposed that to the panel and was accepted onto this job. Along with that, I have some teaching responsibilities, and I'm also responsible for quite a lot of grant capture. So this was the main aim of this postdoctoral job that I'm in at the moment, is helping the University of Derby develop their grant capture. So contributing to a few different interdisciplinary sort of grant bids going on across the university. But postdocs really vary. I mean, the two largest ones, I suppose, are by funded institutions, funded bodies. So the Leverhulme Trust funds an Early Career Researcher Fellowship, and then the British Academy funds a postdoctoral research fellowship. Those are the two main ones you'll probably see. And those ones are 3-year research projects. So your own research project that you're bringing to the table, proposing to the institution, and that they're taking on. So in those cases, it kind of does follow from the PhD, and it's your own research project. And you might have some teaching responsibilities within the institution. There are some differences between the Leverhulme and British Academy that I can talk about if anyone's interested in those afterwards. But yeah, just briefly, that's a postdoc.
Brilliant. Yeah, we'll all be kind of in this room for a little bit longer, I hope. So maybe if there are some issues that we haven't had a chance to talk about yet, we can maybe stay and discuss those. But thank you so much for agreeing to partake. And yeah, thank you very much.
I will also just add, like, if anyone does want to talk about anything Bible related or PhD related or kind of, blogs or anything like that, either do come up and talk to me or anyone online. If you want to just reach out to me on Twitter or anything, I'm happy for people to contact me about that. So, fantastic. Yeah. And thank you, Rosie and Megan, for all
Yeah,
the
well done.